Hello, welcome back to ASMR story time and the final chapter of this eerie tale. Well, the final part of the fourth chapter and the fifth chapter, both together today. I've come to the most swampy place I could find to do the video for this, so that it's very fitting for the story. It's raining slightly, so the tension has really been building. The two characters have discovered that food was missing from their bags, as well as all the problems with the canoe having a hole in it. The flood still rising, all sorts of strange noises. And they reached a point where they felt like some kind of entity was near them. That's where we left it last week. So let's carry on from there. The final part of The Willows by Algernon Blackwood. He had turned ashen white under the tan. He stood bolt upright in front of the fire, stiff as a rod, staring at me. After that, he said in a sort of helpless, frantic way, "We must go. We can't stay now. We must strike camp this very instant and go on down the river." He was talking, I saw, quite wildly, his words dictated by abject terror. The terror he had resigned so long, but which had caught him at last. "In the dark," I exclaimed, shaking with fear after my hysterical outburst, but still realising our position better than he did. Sheer madness. The river's in flood and we've only got a single paddle. Besides, we'll only go deeper into their country. There's nothing ahead for 50 miles but willows, willows, willows. He sat down again in a state of semi-collapse. The positions by one of those kaleidoscope changes nature lovers were suddenly reversed, and the control of our forces passed over into my hands. His mind at last had reached the point where it was beginning to weaken. "What on earth possessed you to do such a thing?" he whispered, with the awe of genuine terror in his voice and face. I crossed round to his side of the fire. I took both his hands in mine, kneeling down beside him and looking straight into his frightened eyes. "We'll make one more blaze," I said firmly, "and then turn in for the night. At sunrise, we'll be off full speed for Cornwall. Now pull yourself together a bit, and remember your own advice about not thinking fear." He said no more, and I saw that he would agree and obey. In some measure, too, it was sort of relief to get up and make an excursion into the darkness for more wood. We kept close together, almost touching, groping among the bushes and along the bank. The humming overhead never ceased, but seemed to me to grow louder as we increased our distance from the fire. It was shivery work. We were grubbing away in the middle of the thickish clump of willows, where some driftwood from a former flood had caught high among the branches, when my body was seized in a grip that made me half drop upon the sand. It was the Swede. He had fallen against me and was clutching me for support. I heard his breath coming and going in short gasps. "Look, by my soul," he whispered. And for the first time in my experience, I knew what it was to hear tears of terror in a human voice. He was pointing at the fire some 50 feet away. I followed the direction of his finger, and I swear my heart missed a beat. There, in front of the dim glow, something was moving. I saw it through a veil that hung before my eyes, like the gauze drop curtain used at the back of a theatre. Hazily a little. It was neither a human figure nor an animal. To me it gave the strange impression of being as large as several animals grouped together like horses, 2 or 3 moving slowly. The Swede got a similar result, though expressing it differently, for he thought it was shaped and sized like a clump of willow bushes, rounded at the top and moving all over upon its surface, coiling upon itself like a snake, he said afterwards. I watched it settle downwards through the bushes. He sobbed at me. "Look, by God, it's coming this way." Oh, he gave a kind of whistling cry. "They found us." I gave one terrified glance, which just enabled me to see that the shadowy form was swinging towards us through the bushes, and then I collapsed backwards with a crash into the branches. These failed, of course, to support my weight, so that with the Swede on top of me, we fell in a struggling heap upon the sand. I really hardly knew what was happening. I was conscious only of a sort of enveloping sensation of icy fear that plucked the nerves out of their fleshy covering, twisted them this way and that, and replaced them quivering. My eyes were tightly shut. Something in my throat choked me, a feeling that my consciousness was expanding, extending out into space. Swiftly gave way to another feeling that I was losing it altogether and about to die. An acute spasm of pain passed through me, and I was aware that the Swede had hold of me in such a way that he hurt me abominably. It was the way he caught at me in falling. But it was the pain, he declared afterwards, that saved me. It caused me to forget them and think of something else in the very instant when they were about to find me. It concealed my mind from them at the moment of discovery, yet just in time to evade their terrible seizing of me. He himself, he says, actually swooned at the same time, and that was what saved him. I only know that at a later date, how long or short is impossible to say, I found myself scrambling up out of the slippery network of willow branches and saw my companion standing in front of me, holding out a hand to assist me. I stared at him in a dazed way, rubbing the arm he had twisted for me. Nothing came to me to say, somehow. I lost consciousness for a moment or two. I heard him say, "That's what saved me." It made me stop thinking about them. "You nearly broke my arm in two," I said, uttering my only connected thought at the moment. A numbness came over as we managed to set them off on a full stack somewhere. The humming has ceased. It's gone, for the moment at any rate. A wave of hysterical laughter seized me again, and this time spread to my friend too. Great healing gusts of shaking laughter that brought a tremendous sense of relief in their train. We made our way back to the fire and put the wood on so that it blazed at once. Then we saw that the tent had fallen over and lay in a tangled heap upon the ground. We picked it up, and during the process tripped more than once and got our feet in sand. "It's those sand funnels," exclaimed the Swede, when the tent was up again and the firelight lit up the ground for several yards about us. "And look at the size of them, all around the tent and about the fireplace where we had been moving. Shadows, there were deep, funnel-shaped hollows in the sand, exactly similar to the ones we had already found over the island, only far bigger and deeper, beautifully formed and wide enough in some instances to admit the whole of my foot and leg. Neither of us said a word. We both knew that sleep was the safest thing we could do. And to bed we went accordingly without further delay, having first thrown sand on the fire and taken the provision sack and the paddle inside the tent with us. The canoe, too, we propped in such a way at the end of the tent that our feet touched it, and the least motion would disturb and wake us. In case of emergency, too, we went to bed in our clothes, ready for a sudden start. So that's the end of chapter number 4, and I'm going to go straight on to chapter 5. It was my firm intention to lie awake all night and watch, but the exhaustion of nerves and body decreed otherwise, and sleep after a while came over me with a welcome blanket of oblivion. The fact that my companion also slept quickened its approach. At first he fidgeted and constantly sat up, asking me if I had heard this or heard that. He tossed about on his cork mattress and said that the tent was moving, and the river had risen over the point of the island. But each time I went out to look, I returned with the report that all was well, and finally he grew calmer and lay still. Then, at length, his breathing became regular, and I heard unmistakable sounds of snoring. The first and only time in my life when snoring has been a welcome and calming influence. This, I remember, was the last thought in my mind before dozing off. A difficulty in breathing woke me, and I found the blanket over my face. But something else besides the blanket was pressing upon me, and my first thought was that my companion had rolled off his mattress onto my own in his sleep. I called to him and sat up, and at the same moment it came to me that the tent was surrounded. That sound of multitudinous, soft pattering was again audible outside, filling the night with horror. I called again to him, louder than before. He did not answer, but I missed the sound of his snoring, and also noticed that the flap of the tent was down. This was the unpardonable sin. I crawled out into the darkness to hook it back securely, and it was then, for the first time, the Swede was not here. He had gone. I dashed out in a mad run, seized by a dreadful agitation. And the moment I was out, I plunged into a sort of torrent of humming that surrounded me completely and came out of every quarter of the heavens at once. It was that same familiar humming gone mad. A swarm of great invisible bees might have been about me in the air. The sound seemed to thicken the very atmosphere, and I felt that my lungs worked with difficulty. But my friend was in danger, and I could not hesitate. The dawn was just about to break, and a faint whitish light spread upwards over the clouds from a thin strip of clear horizon. No wind stirred. I could just make out the bushes and river beyond and the pale sandy patches. In my excitement, I ran frantically to and fro about the island, calling him by name, shouting at the top of my voice the first words that came into my head. But the willows smothered my voice and the humming muffled it, so that the sound only travelled a few feet around me. I plunged among the bushes, tripping headlong, tumbling over roots and scraping my face as I tore this way and that among the preventing branches. Then, quite unexpectedly, I came out upon the island's point and saw a dark figure outlined between the water and the sky. It was the Swede, and already he had one foot in the river. A moment more and he would have taken the plunge. I threw myself upon him, flinging my arms about his waist and dragging him shorewards with all my might. Of course he struggled furiously, making a noise all the time, just like that cursed humming, and using the most outlandish phrases in his anger about going inside to them and taking the way of the water and the wind. And God only knows what more besides, that I tried in vain to recall afterwards, but which turned me sick with horror and amazement as I listened. But in the end I managed to get him into the comparative safety of the tent and flung him breathless and cursing upon the mattress, where I held him until the fit had passed. I think the suddenness with which it all went, and he grew calm, coinciding as it did with the equally abrupt cessation of the humming and pattering outside. I think this was almost the strangest part of the whole business, perhaps, for he had just opened his eyes and turned his face up to me, so that the dawn threw a pale light upon it through the doorway, and said, for all the world just like a frightened child, "My life, old man, it's my life I owe you. But it's all over now anyhow. They've found a victim in our place." Then he dropped back upon his blankets and went to sleep literally under my eyes. He simply collapsed and began to snore again as healthily as though nothing had happened, and he had never tried to offer his own life as a sacrifice by drowning. And when the sunlight woke him 3 hours later, hours of ceaseless vigil for me, it became so clear to me that he remembered absolutely nothing of what he had attempted to do, that I deemed it wise to hold my peace and ask no dangerous questions. He woke naturally and easily, as I have said, when the sun was already high in a windless hot sky, once got up and set about the preparation of the fire for breakfast. I followed him anxiously at bathing, but he did not attempt to plunge in, merely dipping his head and making some remark about the extra coldness of the water. "River's falling at last," he said, "and I'm glad of it." "The humming has stopped too," I said. He looked at me quietly with his normal expression. Evidently he remembered everything except his own attempt at suicide. "Everything has stopped," he said, because he hesitated, but I knew some reference to that remark he had made before he fainted was in his mind, and I was determined to know it. "Because they've found another victim," I said, forcing a little laugh. "Exactly," he answered. "Exactly. I feel as positive of it as though I feel quite safe again, I mean," he finished. He began to look curiously about him. The sunlight lay in hot patches on the sand. There was no wind. The willows were motionless. He slowly rose to feet. "Come," he said. "I think if we look, we shall find it." He started off on a run and I followed him. He kept to the banks, poking with a stick among the sandy bays and caves and little backwaters, myself always close on his heels. "Ah," he exclaimed presently, "ah." The tone of his voice somehow brought back to me a vivid sense of the horror of the last 24 hours, and I hurried up to join him. He was pointing with his stick at a large black object that lay half in the water and half on the sand. It appeared to be caught by some twisted willow roots so that the river could not sweep it away. A few hours before, the spot must have been underwater. "See," he said quietly, "the victim that made our escape possible." And when I peered across his shoulder, I saw that his stick rested on the body of a man. He turned it over. It was the corpse of a peasant, and the face was hidden in the sand. Clearly the man had been drowned, but a few hours before, and his body must have been swept down upon our island somewhere, about the hour of the dawn, at the very time the fit had passed. "We must give it a decent burial, you know." "I suppose so," I replied. I shuddered a little in spite of myself, for there was something about the appearance of that poor drowned man that turned me cold. The Swede glanced up sharply at me, undecipherable expression on his face, and began clambering down the bank. I followed him more leisurely. The current, I noticed, had torn away much of the clothing from the body, so that the neck and part of the chest lay bare. Halfway down the bank, my companion suddenly stopped and held up his hand in warning. But either my foot slipped or I had gained too much momentum to bring myself quickly to a halt, for I bumped into him and sent him forward with a sort of leap to save himself. We tumbled together on the hard sand so that our feet splashed into the water. Before anything could be done, we had collided a little heavily against the corpse. The Swede uttered a sharp cry, and I sprang back as if I had been shot. At the moment we touched the body, there rose from its surface the loud sound of fainter and fainter till they finally ceased in the distance. It was exactly as though we had disturbed some living yet invisible creatures at work. My companion clutched me, and I think I clutched him, but before either of us had time properly to recover from the unexpected shock, we saw that a movement of the current was turning the corpse around, so that it became released from the grip of the willow roots. A moment later, it had turned completely over, the dead face uppermost, staring at the sky. It lay on the edge of the main stream. In another moment it would be swept away. The Swede started to save it, shouting again something I did not catch about a proper burial, and then abruptly dropped upon his knees on the sand and covered his eyes with his hands. I was beside him in an instant. I saw what he had seen. For just as the body swung round to the current, the face and the exposed chest turned full towards us and showed plainly how the skin and flesh were indented with small hollows, beautifully formed and exactly similar in shape and kind to the sand funnels that we had found all over the island. "Their mark," I heard my companion mutter under his breath. "Their awful mark." And when I turned my eyes again from his